Hello and welcome back to yet another session of the NPTEL course Introduction to World Literature. We are in the middle of our discussion of the poem The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. We are looking at the second part, A Game of Chess, and we've been seeing how this is seen as a representative poem of the modernist period and also how this entirely captured the episodic nature of life in early 20th century. When we ended the previous lecture, it was with this neurotic paranoid woman who was sounding anxious and who was sounding paranoid about the noise that she was hearing around her, and we have a speaker who's trying to console her, but at the same time we realize that it is an impossible task. The woman continues to be neurotic and paranoid, and we also realize that there's no linear narrative structure, there is no storyline which is built into this poem. It's only a sequence of a series of events, a series of images which are scattered, which are more like at a metaphorical level, begging to be seen as images of the early 20th century, of the modern world. Before we continue with the poem, I also want you to think about the title, A Game of Chess. As mentioned earlier, this is also from the title of a play by Thomas Middleton, titled A Game at Chess, and there is also reference to another of Middleton's plays, Women Beware Women, where there is a scene which also talks about a game of chess, where there is a game of chess and a series of events around it. So when Eliot is using this title, A Game of Chess, and when he is referring to the game of chess, there are many things which are subtly indicated over here. If you think about this game, chess, it's unlike many other games. There is a calculated nature into this game. The moves, the steps are all measured, and every single step, every single move that is being made is designed in such a way that it should expedite, it should accelerate the defeat of the enemy. So this is how the movements, the various steps in this game are designed. There is of course a certain kind of spontaneity, but that spontaneity is a very measured one. It is something which is very, very calculated. So when Eliot is using this game as a central referral point in this discussion, which is about lavish rooms, about the cheapness of the modern society, about wars, about neurosis, about paranoia, and when he is placing the game of chess as a central motive in some way or the other, in a very, very subtle way, he's also referring to the ways in which relationships and every single move in the modern society is governed by these calculated moves. There is a purpose, there is a very definite end and an aim which is competitive, which is meant to annihilate the enemy, which is always in opposition to the other. And unlike many other games, this is a game which one plays together. Much of the moves happen inside the head. There are things that we anticipate. The next move and the move after that is anticipated when one makes one pawn move ahead or go back. And this is also a game which cannot be predicted because it's happening inside the heads of the opponents. It could go anyway. And also there's a certain rehearsed moves. As if you're familiar with the game, you would know that there are different kinds of moves, there are certain patterns, there are certain kinds of moves which would also force the opponent to move in a certain way. It's a very, very calculated game, and it takes intelligence, it takes perseverance. It's not something which comes to you as a natural gift. It is a technique. It's something that you develop over a period of time. It's something towards which, in order to excel in that, you need to invest your time, you need to invest your energy. It requires not just emotional investment, it also requires a certain kind of an intellectual investment. So this is what Eliot also perhaps has in mind when he is bringing to the forefront the game of chess. And in terms of action, apparently there is no action in a game of chess, but we know that the action is happening at various levels within this chessboard. And the way victory and failure gets decided, it's very, very definitive. There are no gray areas, there are no ambiguities about it, irrespective of the number of moves that you make, irrespective of the kind of progress that you're making in the beginning or towards the end of the game. Once you manage to slay the king, it is also evident that your victory is final. There's a certain finality to it at the end of the game. So There is also another thing in Thomas Middleton's play Beware Women. There's also a reference to sexuality in the context of the game of chess. So here, Eliot is also trying to perhaps indicate to us, hint it out to us, like it is there and almost throughout this poem, that there is no spontaneity even when it comes to sexuality. There is no spontaneity even when it comes to human relationships, even if it is a sexual relationship. It's all based on calculated moves designed to take you towards the final step, the destination, which means victory or failure. Coming back to the discussion of this poem, I begin looking at this segment where the speaker is also trying to remember. I remember those are pearls that were his eyes. Are you alive or not? Is there nothing in your head? Yeah. So again, Eliot is taking back to a classical reference. This is from Tempest, Shakespeare's play. This is a line from the Tempest about a drowned person's eyes turning into pearls. It also invokes a zombie-like image, which is very, very typically modernist. And remember the reference to war and how he spoke about dead men losing their bones and rats' alleys. But here, when he makes this reference to Tempest and to Shakespeare again, what follows soon after is also a sense of disappointment that the modern audience may not really get it because they do not have the patience or perhaps the intellect for it, or perhaps they really don't care. And that's what the poem begins to indicate from now on. I read to you from the poem. Are you alive or not? Is there nothing in your head? But oh, that Shakespearean rag, it's so elegant, so intelligent. What shall I do now? What shall I do? I shall rush out as I am and walk the street with my hair down. So what shall we do tomorrow? What shall we ever do? When he is talking about the pearls and the sinking eyes, he is talking about the hollowness of the modern society, and he also realizes that how terrible the modern people, how the modern society is. And soon after this reference to Tempest, he's moving to Shakespearean rag. So what is the Shakespearean rag? Perhaps this is an allusion to a song called That Mysterious Rag. It was a popular one. It's also a riff on this popular song by Irving Berlin, and this was a song from Eliot's times. So he is only referring to that as the Shakespearean rag to talk about how popular certain other things are, which has got nothing to do with the classical, which has got nothing to do with the intensity that Eliot is referring to in terms of scholarship, in terms of classical knowledge, and in terms of the traditional value system that he thinks is also waning away gradually but very, very steadily. And look at the but in this poem, which is also placed slightly away from the rest of it, from the rest of the poem, and the but also in certain ways signifies that there is a break, that we are going to move on to another segment, that we're going to move on to another set of things which the poem is going to take us through. So when he is talking about the Shakespearean rag, this popular song, that it's elegant, so intelligent, of course he's being very, very sarcastic, and he's also looking at the modern world where there's perhaps hardly any difference between Tempest, a line from Tempest, or a line from one of the popular songs. And now a series of questions. What shall I do? What shall I do? What shall we do tomorrow? What shall we ever do? He's referring to a series of people who've got a lot of time in their hand, but they're clueless about what to do. And think about the early moderns, think about the early 20th century. And as we recall in the previous session, this is the time after the Industrial Revolution. This is the time when technology is really taking on the world, and it is sweeping across Europe. And this is the time when technology is aiding the process of colonization. We find that especially in the context of Britain, there are a lot of other colonies which are also joining hands with Britain and moving ahead in a certain way at a very great pace in terms of technology, in terms of making life easier. So there is certainly a reference to life being made easy and people having a lot of time at hand, and not least to recall the World War that had just happened and how technology also aided it in multiple ways. So here it is referring to a set of people who really do not know what to do with their time. And this series of questions, it reflects their helplessness, their sense of lack, and this total absence of any kind of purpose or any kind of direction which could take them ahead. there's also an inability, a very inherent inability to know what is meaningful and what is not, what is worth pursuing and what is not. In a certain way, the poem in the first few segments, it gives us a sense of the many other worthwhile things the speaker had been pursuing, or what he thinks are worth pursuing. For example, the classics or mythology, the value system which has been passed on. And now, currently, when the poet is talking about the contemporary modern world, he also realizes that there is an inability to communicate this across, that no one knows what to do. And it's a nothingness which begins to dominate. There's a futility of everything which begins to fill the air. One could by extension even talk about the loss of religion or spirituality in modern life. And in Eliot's own case, if you know about one of his later poems, The Return of the Magi, and if you also know about one of his later poems where he talks about his return to religion, his return to spirituality, the poem where he talks about the three Magi, we also get to know that there is a way in which Eliot is perhaps referring to the loss of anything concrete in modern life. And this is something which had begun to set in from the Victorian times onwards. If you recall Matthew Arnold's poem, The Dover Beach, which we have already taken a look at, it is a very clear signifier, a very clear indicator of how everything begins to ebb away, that the sea of faith cannot hold anymore. So in the early 20th century, during the modernist time, we find most of the writers lamenting this loss. And as Eliot had beautifully captured, the center cannot hold anymore. There is nothing that could remain at the center. And this poem, Wasteland in its entirety, and this section in particular, it's actually drawing our attention to how this leaves people entirely helpless as to they're still trying to figure out what to be done with their lives. Nothing seems to be worth pursuing and nothing seems to be worth holding on to. Now we come to a very direct reference to a game of chess. The hot water is at 10, and if it rains, a closed car at 4. And we shall play a game of chess, pressing lidless eyes and waiting for a knock upon the door. These are really, really random things and very, very mundane, ordinary things. They mean and they do not. And they talk about, how people wish to just kill their time because there is nothing else to do. They perhaps would just stay up all night and play a game of chess, or they may just go out or just have a hot water bath at 10. And this is perhaps also again a reminder that without anything to hold on to, without these value systems which are soon ebbing away in the early 20th century, and without spirituality, perhaps life is just another game of chess that we play with ourselves, among ourselves, and sometimes competing, setting goals, and most importantly, strategizing every move. That's what he means by inserting the game of chess here as well. Even in the midst of this futility, even in the midst of getting caught in a sense of purposelessness, these people who are involved in this situation, they still want to play chess, strategize, set goals, win, and make calculated moves without even attempting to be spontaneous. And sometimes it could also be just playing for the sake of playing a game because there's hardly anything else to do. So I would like to again remind you that in Thomas Middleton's play Beware Women, there is a scene which has a game of chess, and it represents all the moves that a man makes while cornering and seducing a woman. And this in fact comes up later again in The Wasteland when Eliot tells us about the story of the young man Carbuncle. You can find it if you care to read through the rest of the sections of The Wasteland. And when he's referring to lidless eyes, he's of course referring to sleepless nights and almost to the extent of an impossibility to fall asleep. Sleep being also one of those conditions which would help us renovate ourselves, which would help us rejuvenate ourselves and give us some moment of rest, something away from the everydayness and from the mundaneness that one goes through. And about the waiting for a knock upon the door, this is again goes without saying that it talks about these set of people or these individuals who are waiting for something to happen, someone to come in, a knock at the door, and some meaning to walk in through the door and fulfill their lives. Again, this wait for something that may or may not come. Again, please recall the references from Waiting for Godot, where nothing comes, no one goes, and nothing happens. And after this point, we find the poem entirely collapsing into disorder. It's just conversations at a pub, So the setting entirely changes. Think about the burnished throne in the beginning, which made us recall, which made us think about Antony and Cleopatra, very classic, very romantic, eternal love. And from that, it has descended into a scene in the pub. And let's follow the conversation to see what Eliot is hinting at, what he is taking us through. And it's in this final segment that the elements of fertility, about sexuality, about loveless marriage, these are also some of the themes that he had been engaging with, and this is particularly evident in Wasteland. Wasteland, as you may already know, it refers to this infertile land out of which nothing would come, and it also refers to this absolute lack of virility in the figurative sense as well as in a sexual sense. And in this final segment, when he is talking about marriage, sexuality, and the many things and the many related emotions which are part of it, he is also drawing our attention to the central theme of this poem, which is about navigating our way through a world where all of these things have been reduced to merely a game of chess, merely calculated moves, merely certain set of things, strategies and techniques that one use just to survive through the modern world. So coming to this final segment, when Lil's husband got demobbed, so we are now being introduced to two characters. We have Lil and her husband, and there is a speaker who seems to know everything about the characters who are part of this poem. And Lil is a character which instantly appears again in Wasteland. When Lil's husband got demobbed, I didn't mince my words, I said to her myself, hurry up please, it's time. Now Albert's coming back, make yourself a bit smart. He'll want to know what you've done with that money he gave you to get yourself from teeth. He did, I was there, you gave them all out to Lil and get a nice set. He said, I swear I can't bear to look at you. And no more can't I said. And think of poor Albert. He's been in the army for 4 years. He wants a good time. And if you don't give it him, there's others will. I said, oh, is there, she said. Something of that, I said. Then I'll know who to thank, she said, and give me a straight look. Hurry up, please, it's time. If you don't like it, you can get on with it, I said. Others can pick and choose if you can't. So there are these many characters here. There's Lil's husband, Albert, who's clearly away fighting in the army, and he's soon about to come back. And there's also this friend who's trying to advise Lil. So there is no ordered rhyme here, as you can see. It just depends on conversation. Even the little bit of order that the poem seemed to have in the beginning has completely collapsed over here. So the classic culture, the classic tradition to which we were introduced to at the beginning, very elegant and very knowledgeable and very scholarly and of course very romantic, and that has kind of given way into barroom conversations. There is nothing elegant about this. It's very, very direct. It's not subtle at all. It also talks about things which were otherwise very, very taboo. So what is this conversation about here? From this segment onwards, these lines that we just read out and the rest of a game of chess, it's about a woman who is having this conversation with her friend or one of her acquaintances. So one woman is explaining how she told her friend to make herself look good, look attractive for her husband who's returning from the war, because he will come back desiring to own her, and she should make herself look good for that, because if she doesn't, he may end up looking at other places. So the woman tells her friend to get her gross teeth pulled out and buy herself a new set of teeth. It's all about their looks. And more importantly, the significant turning point here is that the woman who pretends to be the woman who appears like Lil's friend and who is advising her on how to keep her husband is also telling her, if you don't know how to keep her, perhaps I will just chip in and make him my own. So this is the way even friendship begins to work here, and this is something that Eliot is doing deliberately to get this theme across. There is hardly anything which is permanent, and it is more or less like a very wise, smart moves made in chess. Look at these lines in between in all caps. Hurry up, please, it's time. Hurry up, please, it's time. It is the bartender calling out because it's already very late. They want them to leave the bar, leave the pub so that they can close and go. It's almost closing time. It's almost midnight perhaps, or even past midnight. And this is in fact a standard thing for the bartenders to say in the UK when the bar is closing for the night, and Eliot is using this phrase as a refrain. If you notice, it keeps coming. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times where this refrain in all caps is getting refrained. It, of course, it means for one, that the bartender is asking them to hurry up because it's closing time. And at another level, It's also about the modern period. It's also about the speaker being reminded, or perhaps the speaker himself reminding the readers that there is no time left. You need to hurry up. It's time. And whatever little that needs to be done or not done, it needs to be either wrapped up or just left alone wherever it is. This refrain, which sounds very, very ordinary and also a bit creepy at another level, it is in fact, it adds a sense of urgency and a desperation. And interestingly, the women who are part of this conversation, the one who is listening, Lil especially, she doesn't seem to get that at all. The sense of urgency and the desperation which the poem is trying to convey perhaps is also with the assumption that the modern readers may not get it at all. They may just continue to find their way through life, navigate their way through life, not even knowing the kind of changes that had come and swept in. And in retrospective, when we think about the series of events that happened after the publication of this poem, the times in between the war and what happened after the Second World War, we are led to be more and more convinced about the arguments which this poem is making, that people really didn't care and they were clueless about the kind of catastrophe that waited ahead of them. Think of the Hiroshima-Nagasaki bombing, which entirely changed the grammar of wars, and it entirely changed the way in which people can get at each other, regardless of how humongous the repercussions could be. So now this conversation, it begins to take an ugly turn. If you don't like it, you can get on with it, I said. Others can pick and choose if you can't. But if Albert makes off, it won't be for lack of telling. You ought to be ashamed, I said, to look so antique. And her only 31. I can't help it, she said, pulling a long face. It's them pills I took to bring it off, she said. She's had 5 already and nearly died of young George. The chemist said it would be all right, but I've never been the same. You are a proper fool, I said. Well, if Albert won't leave you alone, there it is, I said. What do you get married for if you don't want children? Hurry up, please, it's time. Well, that Sunday, Albert was home. They had a hot gammon, and they asked me in to dinner to get the beauty of it hot. Hurry up, please, it's time. Hurry up, please, it's time. It's a very awkward conversation between two friends, apparently. Two friends. Lily then accuses her friend of saying, if at all her husband goes away with somebody, I'll know perhaps who to thank. The friend who claims to be Lil's woman, she's telling her very, very directly that she should be ashamed to look so antique when she's barely turned 31. And then Lil says the reason for her to look so exhausted and so antique and so old, because she'd been taking those pills to bring it off. The phrase bring it off in this case literally to abort a baby. And we also need to think about those times. It's the early 20th century, 1920s and 1930s, when taking a pill, it could have serious repercussions. It could have serious strong chemical reaction. It could lead to serious chemical reactions in your body because things were not really advanced then. So when she's talking about a pill, obviously she's also hinting to the many relations that she had been having when her husband was away, and the pills that she had to take in order to abort a baby, which was perhaps the outcome of one of those relations. And she also talks about her many pregnancies and the 5 babies and how she nearly died when she had little George. And she talks about how she continued to take the drug because the pharmacist said it was okay. So we find these many, many things coming together here. The many advancements in the medical field and the many advancements in the field of medicine, the many advancements in the field of technology in general, how that also takes over your life in a very intimate, personal way as well. Of course, I don't think Eliot is trying to be judgmental about the things, about the way things are going in the early 20th century. But of course, he's drawing our attention to the less visible images, which can also be very heart-wrenching and very heartbreaking as well. And here the conversation also begins to break down. The woman who is with Lil is clearly not interested in a conversation. She continues to accuse Lil of many things. She even goes to the extent of saying, what do you get married for if you don't want children? Suggesting that this is all a part of what you sign up for, that this is a package deal that you signed up for willingly and there is no way out of it. What Eliot is here trying to do is to give a sense of how difficult things have become, how complicated the English society had become, irrespective of the very advanced, very posh outer layer that one gets to see. In the early 20th century, there are many, many things which are happening in England which also makes it one of the superpowers of the world. They are way ahead of the rest of Europe in terms of their colonial power. They had established themselves as the land where the sun never sets. And we also know about the many reforms that they tried to bring about in their colonies. If we take our own country as an example, we know about the multiple ways in which modernity entered the Indian subcontinent through the many interventions and through the many policy decisions that the colonial administration, the British Crown, had taken on behalf of the colony. So we know about the many good things and the contributions to the post-colonial world that Britain had done. But irrespective of that, Eliot is also saying that, but in spite of that, Eliot is also telling us that in spite of this white man's spirit and in spite of this holier-than-thou attitude that the colonial master had always been donning, things are not really fine underneath this posh, elegant, all-well surface. Finally, before we wrap up, I want you to pay attention to the fact that the theme of infertility is very prominent and evident here throughout, because there's hardly anything productive that is happening. There are a series of things which happens. It is packed with action in some way or the other, but nothing really leads to anything at all, and no one seems to be sure of anything. And here we do not get even a sense of the progress of the idea of modernity or any sense of the technological or advancements in other fields that are getting reflected into day-to-day lives, the ways in which relationships are defined. It had touched the rock bottom as far as Eliot is concerned, and it is a fall from the civilization and from the culture that was before. And in the conversation between these two women, Lil and the woman she meets at the bar, if there is one thing that stands out as incredibly painful, it is also about the image of the lower class women almost killing themselves to abort their babies. And this is an act of self-preservation at some level, to preserve their dignity, to preserve their relations, and also to preserve their reputation in some way. But in this process, they are literally killing themselves. Their body is getting disintegrated, and there is no way in which an intervention could be made at this point, irrespective of the hard-hitting facts of modernity as well that we see around. And towards the end, we find that this refrain gets stronger. Hurry up, please, it's time. Hurry up, please, it's time. And then, good night, Bill. Good night, Lou. Good night, Meg. Good night, Tata. Good night, good night, good night, ladies. Good night, sweet ladies. Good night, good night. So that's about it. The poem comes to a halting end at this point without really resolving anything, without really bothering to leave us with some feel-good factor about anything at all. And we also realize that there has not been any movement at all from the beginning till the end. There are just a series of images which could represent either the contemporary in the way it is, or it could draw attention to what the contemporary is not. Beyond that, it really does not do anything. But irrespective of it, think about the powerful images, then the powerful kind of intervention that this poem had then and now. Towards the end, we also find that they are talking about going to somebody's place for dinner, and they're trying to normalize things, but we also know that they are pretty much meaningless and they do not change anything which is happening here. Yeah, the barkeeper, towards the end, we realize he's practically yelling. He wants everyone to leave. It's time to close down. And the scene ends with everyone saying goodnight to one another. And they're all very pleasant and polite. And we also get to know that when Lil and her friend are having this conversation, there were so many others who were around them. Bill, Lou and May. And they are all being very courteous when they are trying to say goodbye. And considering the kind of conversation that they just had about telling Lil that she looks antique, she may even lose her husband if she continues to look like this and do not take care of herself. And why did she even agree to get married if she did not want to have children? And given the way these unpleasant things were part of this conversation, it looks quite inappropriate and very ironic that they're very nice to each other. Good night, sweet ladies, as it says. But perhaps it is also about the way the modern life is. Everything is part of this friendship, and there's no way in which one can continue to be only appropriate and only polite, because the modern times and the situations that one has got within, it also calls for these ambivalences to come together. The final repetition of good night, sweet ladies, good night, good night. This is again a reference to Ophelia. She's a woman who drowns herself in Shakespeare's play Hamlet. You find how significant the references to Shakespeare are throughout this segment. And Eliot definitely had done this very, very deliberately, hoping that his audience would catch it. But truth be told, it also needs some kind of a scholarly glossary intervention, a scholarly guide, taking us through all of these references most of the time. They are not as self-evident as Eliot perhaps had hoped it would be, but that's perhaps the predicament that he's also drawing our attention to, that things are not really self-evident. They need to be shown in certain ways, they need to be showcased and framed in certain ways that they begin to make sense, and it also opens up possibilities to talk about these things. I hope you enjoyed reading this poem, and I leave you with this thought. What Eliot and most of the modernists had achieved the most was this possibility that they opened up, that it became possible to talk about the modern times, talk about the early 20th century in ways that were not part of the dominant colonial rhetoric, in ways that were not part of the dominant narratives of modernity, of progress, of technology, of advancement, of newer governments, of newer policies. It was a rosy picture in many ways. Here, Eliot, along with many other modernist writers, he is giving us a forum to talk not just about the early 20th century, but also talk about the predicament that we are all caught in spite of the many things, the many narratives, the many rosy narratives which are dominating the society, contemporary or at any point of time. I hope this was helpful in giving you a sense of what this poem is, and you also should know that this poem is open to multiple interpretations, and the poem Wasteland, all 4 segments together, it's definitely worth taking a look at, and also pay attention to the many scholarly frameworks and narratives within which the poem continues to be situated, and the canonical status, of course, that it continues to enjoy. I thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in the next session.